Let me begin where Senator Pryor left off, and that is to commend our chairwoman for extraordinary leadership, not only on behalf of her constituents, but for the nation. These are very difficult times, and we all feel much more confident because of her leadership, because of her commitment, because of her incredible and energetic advocacy for a common sense, common purpose in terms of not just our appropriations, but in terms of the way we conduct ourselves in the United States Senate. And so we're extraordinarily fortunate to have her leadership. And Mr. President, I'm here along with many of my colleagues to address these looming fiscal deadlines and, more importantly, how do we keep our economy growing and our jobs increasing? That is really why I believe we were sent here, not to engage in some of these procedural arguments, not to challenge basic presumptions and the history of our country, which we've always managed to keep, with some few exceptions, our government open, and with virtually no exceptions, we've paid our bills. And yet today, we are consumed by these debates when most every American in every corner of this country is asking us, what about our jobs? What about growth? What about the future for our children? So we have to go ahead and refocus on growing our economy, investing in our country, and part of that is to fund our government and to pay our debts, a big part of that. One other last point that should be made, too, is that the presumption that we are going to deny 30 million Americans health care is not going to help our economy. It won't create jobs. It'll do quite the opposite. It will set us back. It won't move us forward. We had a substantial debate. We passed legislation, but the Supreme Court of the United States declared the legislation constitutional, and we are going forward now, and as most Americans want us to do, to deploy it, to fix it where it needs to be fixed, but not to use it as a political wedge for purely political means. For the first time, to achieve a dream of many people over many decades, that every American will have affordable access to health care. And by the way, to do what other nations have been able to do is to reduce the cost of health care so that we can afford it not just today, but in the generations ahead. And the idea that you would threaten a government shutdown to try to achieve this objective, I think, is something that is unfortunate and inappropriate. We are facing two fiscal deadlines, and they can be reduced to very simple questions. Do we fund the government, and do we pay the nation's bills? And my answer, and the answer of the vast majority of my constituents around, is simply yes, we do. We have to. We understand that we have to go ahead and have an economy that works and a government that helps that economy work. We have to be efficient and effective, but we can't leave simply to the mercies of the market and to the fates what happens in our economy. We have to take purposeful action. And that means we have to have a government that is prepared and able and resourced to act. Now, if there is a shutdown, if Republicans force a shutdown of the government, it'll have extraordinarily adverse consequences to thousands of Rhode Island workers, my constituents, people all across this country. It would hurt our economic growth, obviously. Rather than doing this, we should be working to expand our growth. We should be doing more to get people back to work. But we've heard in both chambers, Republicans in talking about another round of brinksmanship. We saw this in August of 2011. And the results there were palpable. It set back our economy. It suppressed job creation. It took what looked like a growing economic momentum and it literally deflated. Our credit rating was downgraded. For the first time, I think in anyone's recollection, perhaps in history. It was a short-sighted game that hurt people all across this country, and yet here we are again, apparently prepared to play the game. People do not want us to be gaming their futures, their children's futures. They want us to be helping them, investing in those futures in a positive, and we hope, collaborative effort with both sides. But we're back. Will we pay our bills by voting to raise the debt ceiling? Will we keep the government open and working so that we can help people who need help, so that we continue to research issues, so we continue to innovate, so we continue to build, literally, the country? We believe we must do this. This March, Senate Democrats passed a budget that set spending levels, responsibly replaced the sequester, reduced the deficit, and included a $100 billion targeted jobs and infrastructure package that would start creating new jobs quickly, begin repairing the worst of our crumbling roads and bridges, and help train our workers to fill 21st century jobs. The Republican-controlled House also passed a budget. It's in stark contrast to ours, but they have a budget too. So the basic constitutional approach, the basic procedural approach, is to bring those two budgets to conference, to iron out the differences, and to have a plan to go forward to fund the government and to meet our basic needs. But we can't do that because repeatedly Republicans here have objected to going to conference. Now, this is very ironic, since the refrain that you heard several years ago was the Senate Democrats have got a budget. They don't have a budget, et cetera. It was a pretty good political response. It ignored the fact that in the Budget Control Act of 2011, we actually set budget limits and effectively had a budget. But now it's sort of, never mind. They've got a budget, but we don't want the Congress to have a budget. We need to pass a budget. We need to responsibly deal with sequestration. We have to create jobs and strengthen the middle class. Now, last Friday, the House Republicans played their latest card in this gambit that's extended over several years to achieve their political goals by holding the economy hostage. This time, they want to defund health reform as a condition of keeping the government open. Indeed, a tactic I believe that many Republicans in this body have rejected, and I think sensibly rejected. And there's no doubt that if the House vision prevails, it will hurt our economy. It will reduce revenue. It will waste taxpayers' dollars. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the shutdowns in the mid-90s reduced GDP by 0.5%. Those episodes under the Clinton administration, again prompted with a political agenda, not an economic agenda, by the Republicans in the House, cost Americans jobs and growth. It's estimated that every week the government shut down, it will cost the economy about $30 billion. This is a very expensive political gambit, something that should be rejected on its face, but also rejected because of the adverse harm, the demonstrable economic harm it will do the country. So if you do care about the jobs and the economy, the last thing you want to do is shut the government down. First of all, it eliminates directly lots of people who work for the federal government, who pay taxes, who provide critical services. The secondary effects is they can't do their job, so other economic activity is stalled. And then the tertiary effect is that the local vendors in the communities who rely on the government contractors lose their business, and it is a downward spiral. And everyone here, particularly my colleagues who are chairmen and women of the appropriations subcommittees, recognize this. Senator Pryor was very articulate about some of the effects in the agricultural sector. I have the privilege of chairing the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee. And a shutdown would be very, very disruptive. For example, Lease sales and permits for oil, gas, coal, and other minerals on federal lands and waters will be stopped. Processing onshore oil and gas drilling applications will stop. Processing applications for permits to drill offshore will stop. Review and approval of offshore exploration and development plans will stop. What will be the effect? Well, this will delay revenue, obviously, both for the federal government and for the private sector. For those private entrepreneurs who are out there investing their own capital to try to develop natural resources and provide them to the marketplace, they'll lose out too. Another example, public access to recreation and federal lands will virtually cease. The national parks, the national monuments, the national wildlife refuges will all be closed to visitors. Campgrounds and lodging, visitor centers, marinas, food services, and other concessions will be closed, with thousands of people without jobs. Businesses that operate in the parks as outdoor outfitters will not be able to access permitted areas. If you go to any national park, there is typically around it a group of small businessmen and women that provide backpacking gear, that provide rental of rafts and boats and outdoor equipment. What happens when the park closes? Their business goes to zero practically. And that's a consequence that is predictable, in fact, inevitable. There's another aspect to this government shutdown, too. While many federal employees will be furloughed, again, directly losing their pay, not contributing their tax dollars to the national economy, there are some who just can't be. In the Interior Department alone, thousands of federal workers will continue their jobs in order to protect life and property, but they won't be paid. This will include the Park Police. They were one of the first responses a few days ago to the Navy Yard shootings. Typical of their ethic of service and dedication to the country, they risked their lives, rushed to that place to try to protect fellow Americans. Those men and women of the Park Service Police will still stand guard, but they won't be paid. And it also includes park rangers who provide valuable safety. It would include tribal law enforcement officers for our tribal police departments, tribal child protection services, and the oil and gas inspectors who have to go out and make sure that existing operations are being conducted in a technically appropriate way. Turning to the EPA, Administrator Gina McCarthy has said, in her words, EPA effectively shuts down with only a core group of individuals who are there in the event of a significant emergency. EPA is planning to furlough approximately 95% of its total workforce. Staff will not be reviewing air, water, and hazardous waste permit applications or writing such permits. This will slow construction of new facilities and major improvements to existing ones, impacting jobs and impacting industry's overall willingness to plan investments. If you want to stop shrinking construction in the United States, major construction projects, then just take out the permitting process, nullify it, because they can't go forward legally without permits. Permits from EPA, permits from local regulators, and you will have a huge contraction. You will have projects that have been planned, that are going forward, that they'll put on hold, and it'll ripple through the economy. EPA, for example, also will stop certifying that manufacturers are complying with all vehicle emission standards. And without EPA certification, automakers will have a difficult time selling products in the United States. Here, one of the great examples of what the President's leadership has done, the revitalization of the American automobile industry, could be jeopardized simply because of the fact they can't have their vehicles certified because the EPA is basically closed. And a shutdown compounds the hidden costs of the sequester. It is an inefficient and blunt instrument, the sequestration. It forces the agencies to make drastic decisions that frustrate that mission, that do not allow them to prioritize, and it frustrates all of us, and it will complicate and compound our life going forward. You know, we're already feeling, put aside for the moment a potential government shutdown, we're already feeling the effects of the pending sequestration. We're seeing forced furloughs up in Rhode Island at the Newport Navy base and other facilities. And we're seeing the ripple effect of that. The local businesses, they're seeing demand go down, revenues go down, their financial viability being threatened. Rhode Islanders have been, who've been laid off in private enterprises and other enterprises through no fault of their own are seeing their unemployment insurance cut by the sequester already. The average weekly benefit of $377 is being cut by $46. The Rhode Island Department of Labor and Training estimates 6,000 to 7,000 Rhode Islanders are being affected, taking $1.4 million per month directly out of our economy. Our economy is still staggering, 9% unemployment. And this is something that is causing pain and hardship to families throughout my state. And we're now even cutting back on the very modest benefits that they might be receiving after losing their employment. Head Start, extraordinarily valuable program. It serves more than 2,400 children in my state. For fiscal year 13, the sequestration has reduced funding by $1.3 million, which is a big number when it comes to the smallest state and area in the country. To manage these cuts, staff has been laid off. Transportation has been reduced. Other support services. But even with those savings, 370 slots, 370 children, don't call them slots, children will not get access to Head Start. That means in many cases their parents can't continue to work because they can't leave their child alone. And the problems become more and more complicated. These problems have profound implications, and they reach very far across the spectrum. And then there's one other point I want to make here, is that some people are saying, well, you know, sequestration is bad, but we really just have to deal with the defense aspects of it, because, you know, that's the most important thing. These other programs, you know, they can go their way. Well, it was interesting because Norm Augustine, who's one of the premier leaders in the defense industry, former chairman of Lockheed Martin, former undersecretary of the Army. He's served on so many different boards as one of the great sort of public servants as well as industrial leaders. The National Academy of Engineering, Defense Science Board, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. Well, in a speech recently, Mr. Augustine said that much of the non-defense spending that people are sort of dismissing as unimportant is more critical to our national security or as critical as some of the defense programs. He talked about how today's youngest generation will be the first in history to be less well-educated than their parents if trends continue, and they're likely to be less healthy, particularly if we don't continue to support the health care improvements under the Affordable Care Act. One of the startling discoveries is the military, according to Mr. Augustine, is claiming that 70% of today's young people are ineligible for military service because of mental, physical, and moral shortcomings. Now, the mental and physical shortcomings are a function of two things, education and health care. And we're proposing to say, let's cut them. Let's drop this whole proposal about affordable care. And who will be the beneficiary of affordable care and better Head Start and better education? Probably those 70% of those young people who can't qualify to be recruits in the United States Army. So you think we have a problem with national defense. We do have a problem with defense. But it's not simply by buying more platforms, more ships, more planes. It's by having a generation of Americans who can stand up and serve. And Mr. President, I could go on, but I just simply want to say that we are in a situation where we have to basically do what we've always done. Stood up and said, we're going to keep the government moving. We're going to make choices about priorities, but we're going to keep our government open. and we'll debate those choices, and we'll debate those priorities, and we'll come to a conclusion, and we'll move forward. And oh, by the way, we're going to pay the debts we've already accumulated. The American people should understand, this is not like an initial, sort of offer of debt security.
The majority time has expired.
What I request an additional 30 seconds.
Without objection.
We're not going out there saying, listen, let us borrow some more money so we can spend this new money. We're just trying to pay for programs and appropriations that have been approved by the Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, both the House and the Senate. These are accumulated debts. Many of the debts were accumulated in the previous administration fighting 2 wars. We're not, and we shouldn't turn our back for the first time in our history in what we have voted previously to spend. And indeed, if we do that, it'll create chaos in economic markets. Chaos that we have never seen before, and the markets internationally are so fragile that we dare not risk this. And with that, Mr. President, excuse me, I would yield the floor.